What or who comes to mind when you say the word Romania? Everyone on a historical or even mythological level thinks of him, Vlad Tepes. Dracula, the Impaler, the historical figure who gave rise to the myth of the vampire Dracula, then declined in 1,000 ways and with various names throughout history, both literary and especially cinematic. Then her, Nadia Comaneci, one of the greatest gymnasts who have ever set foot on the pedal of the whole world. But it's impossible not to think about him. Nicolae Ceausescu, the man who for so many decades was the authentic, unique symbol of Romania in the world. A symbol full of contradictions, also sometimes full of extremisms, but not so rich in material terms. Despite the many legends that have been born about him and have developed over time, today we try to know him a little better. When the Romanian Revolution breaks out, sudden, violent, in December 1989, Nicolae Ceausescu has been in full power in Romania for over 24 years. He is no longer that young communist agitator who had known the jails of his homeland. In the darkest period of the 30s, when various totalitarian dictatorships of a fascist nature were asserting themselves in the heart of Europe, and Romania, of course, was no exception, Ceausescu had emerged as a rising politician after the Second World War and had asserted his power from 1965 onwards, a pivotal date for Romanian history. Why? For this, we need to go a little bit back. As mentioned, Nicolae Ceausescu was born in Scornicesti on January 26, 1918, but when he was just of age, he was already known to the police of his country. Why? Well, Romania, as mentioned, at the time was a dictatorship, a fascist dictatorship, and a character like Ceausescu, an activist of the local Communist Party, soon ended up on the blacklist. Arrests, identifications. The prison. Well, it was in prison that the real political fortune was given, not only to Ceausescu, because he had shared a cell with a man destined to be very important, Gheorghe Gheorghiu, a name that to many in the West means nothing, but who was the political godfather and in some ways also the master of politics and government of Ceausescu himself. Gheorghiu, the son of a simple worker, had been the head of the Romanian Communist Party, a leadership that he fully assumed in 1944 after the end of Marshal Ion Antonescu's regime and after the invasion of Romania by the Red Army. But already in the 30s, Gheorghiu was recognized as a leader of the Partidul Comunist Roman, the Romanian Communist Party. In prison, Gheorghiu had taken under his protective wing. That young Ceausescu he had indoctrinated. He had taught him everything he knew about organizing a militant party. And once he got out of prison, he didn't want him with him. Where to the government? Because in 1947, Romania, precisely on the impulse of the Soviet Union and also in function of the Yalta agreements, definitively enters the Soviet orbit. The communists take power. Obviously, the West does nothing because there is the secret agreement, that agreement between the three great ones, who, with a stroke of a pencil, have divided Europe into spheres of influence. On this side, the West, on that side, the East, on this side, the capitalist world, the first world, on that side, the socialist world, the second world. The third world will come after that. Not to the idea Romania falls within the socialist sphere, but George Day has some particular ideas. First of all, he does not adhere to the idea of destabilization. He doesn't like it. He's not a fanatic like Enver Roja, whom we've already met in one of our videos. You can find him on the channel. But he doesn't like it. What could be defined as the Nouvelle Vague, the new line of thought that comes from Moscow, from the Kremlin. He doesn't even like having to protect minorities. In Transylvania, that region that has become all too well known for the rumors about vampires, it was said, in Transylvania there has been a strong Hungarian-speaking minority for centuries. A minority that during the last World War had obtained the protection of Hitler and had also managed to return to Hungary, a real territorial expansion after the end of the war and the redefinition of borders. That minority found itself again in Romania, again subjected to a Romanian government, and this time not a fascist government, but a communist government. A government that had no intention of granting the usual favors, starting with the teaching of the Hungarian language and the protection of language and tradition. Moreover, when protests break out in Hungary, in Budapest, we talked about it in another video on our channel, and it's the same Giorgio Day working hard to prevent the protest from spreading to the Hungarian community in Romania. He gradually invites the same Hungarians from Romania to leave, to return to the West, to the other neighboring state, once the repression is over. Giorgio Day doesn't stop at that. He also dislikes the excessive Soviet control. In the mid-50s, his first move was to prohibit the only state in the Eastern Bloc, the mandatory teaching of Russian in schools. In all other satellite states, Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria, Russian was the second language. It was taught in all schools starting from middle schools. While Romania breaks away from this system, the first tier, a tier that will become more solid, 1965 is the year when Nicolae Ceausescu comes to power. He doesn't overthrow his old master. He simply succeeds him because Giorgio Day, suffering from lung cancer, dies. And he leaves, leaving the responsibility of the state to that former rising star who had already been his Minister of Agriculture, Defense, and Undersecretary of State, and who, after all, everyone saw as his protege, his natural successor. And Ceausescu actually follows the doctrine of Gheorghe Udi, we could say to the letter, even beyond. Beyond because he himself manifests a typical trait of the communist dictators of the time, the famous cult of personality. Yes, Romania remains a socialist republic. It is included in the Eastern Bloc, but Romania first and foremost is Nicolae Ceausescu. So it is seen in the Eastern Bloc, so it is also seen in the West. It's Ceausescu's country. It's not simply a satellite country of the Soviet Union that for a long time struggles to tolerate Ceausescu's autonomy. However, he boasts of his unassailable successes. One of these is represented by his Romanian Revolution, a social, agricultural, industrial revolution aimed at decisively changing the face of the Romanian state. What does this revolution consist of? We could almost call it a copy or even a small precursor of the White Revolution of the Shah of Persia, Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, whom we have also already encountered in some of our stories. It's a revolution that aims first and foremost to transform society, to restructure it, to rebuild it. Romania is still a very agricultural state in the 60s, heavily based on agriculture, and partly on the extractive industry, not just the oil from the Ploiești wells. Well, Ceausescu wants to transform this agricultural state into an industrialized and urbanized state. Large masses of peasants are forced to move from the countryside to the cities, to the factories. But it's a round-trip migration because in the end, the Romanians, the rural ones, always end up returning home to their own field to cultivate. There are those who leave in the morning for the factories, return home in the afternoon, and cultivate their own small garden, their own field. Or maybe they work during the week in the factory, but on the weekend they dedicate themselves to farming. Well, this is the first step of Nicolae Ceausescu's Romanian Revolution, a revolution that also goes through the demographic issue, as in Maoist China, a country that is taken as a model by Ceausescu. Even in Romania, they aim for demographic growth, hitting hard through heavy taxation. Singles, men and women who do not marry, or who still do not have children by the age of 25, and instead rewarding widespread birth rates, even excessive birth rates. Think that the minimum limit of children is set at 3, then raised to 4 and 5. Whoever even manages to reach the threshold of the 10th child is proclaimed as a socialist heroine woman and enjoys certain privileges. There will be very few Romanian socialist heroines who have had so many children. Many women, on the other hand, will die on the operating tables of illegal abortions because abortions are banned in Romania, or they will remain sterile forever or even mutilated because they can't afford children, they can't have children because they don't have anything to feed them, they don't know how to nourish them. And this is the great paradox of Romania. A Romania that chases prosperity, but in the end it's just a dictatorship. It's not a Romania open to commercial trade from socialism. Unlike Tito's Yugoslavia, it's a closed country seeking wealth, a paradox. Clearly no one points this out to Ceausescu. Also, because the control of security, the secret police, the politically organized military police, is total. Media censorship, censorship of any dissenting voice, repression, violence, prison, and sometimes even capital punishment. For those who are against, for those who do not want dictatorship, for those who dare to raise their voice against Nicolae Ceausescu. Ceausescu, however, knows that his dream, the dream of a different Romania, a Romania where socialism is multilateral. This term cannot ignore certain dialogues. One of these is with the European community. In 1974, Ceausescu signs a pact that includes his country in the generalized system of community preferences. It's a first step to try the path of exporting Romanian products, not just oil. Then there's the international issue. As mentioned, Ceausescu has a strong admiration for China, which he visits repeatedly. He has a certain idiosyncrasy towards Moscow and generalized control, to the point that he does not intend, in fact he refuses, to lend his troops to the Warsaw Pact for the repression of the Spring of Braga of 1968-1868. He denounces, in fact, its unnecessarily repressive character as a sign of rupture. Moreover, Ceausescu takes a more friendly stance towards Israel than the Arab states. In a period when the Eastern Bloc is totally aligned in favor of Nasser and the other Arab leaders, apart, of course, from Hussein of Jordan, who has chosen the American protective umbrella. In short, Ceausescu is a divisive leader, but also a leader who repeatedly seeks the dramatic gesture. For example, when he asks for and obtains loans from abroad, this tendency of his to propagate the so-called human face of Romanian socialism, which is not so human after all, exactly, security and the repressive apparatus. It attracts the interest of foreign capital that lends money to Romania, and it's money that goes to finance the powerful economic growth of the Romanian country. It's a large loan of over $13 billion, which in the 70s flows into the coffers of the Romanian state and finances as much as possible, the industrial growth of the country. But this loan is also a reason for the future crisis of Romania, a crisis that manifests itself in the mid-80s when the loan must be repaid. When Ceausescu himself, in a dramatic turn, decides to close the chapter of debt to bring Romania back to full economic sovereignty, giving up foreign support. But there's only so much money, especially the amounts that need to be repaid. Ceausescu clearly doesn't want to make the decision alone. He dumps everything on the people. He calls it the referendum. Do you want to be servants of the West and its dollars? Yes or no? Clearly, the majority of Romanians choose economic independence. They choose to abolish the debt, to repay at the cost of very serious sacrifices foreign entrepreneurs who have financed the Romanian state. But these are very heavy sacrifices. In fact, growth stops. It stops relentlessly. In fact, we see a real recession, a recession that goes hand in hand. Another low blow that comes to Ceausescu is the defection of one of his most esteemed collaborators, Ion Mihai Pacepa, a security general who in 1978 flees from Bucharest and takes refuge in the United States. In Washington, Pacepa talks with the spies, talks with American diplomacy, writes a book that is the death knell for Romania's trade relations with the Western world. Because in that book, Pacepa reveals that Romania is achieving strong economic growth. With brutal and ruthless industrial espionage against American and Western companies, it's a scandal clearly. Ceausescu denies the accusations, saying that Pacepa, gone mad, simply wanted power and not having obtained it, went to the West to spread poison. But this and the anxiety to repay the debt marks the end of the so-called Romanian economic miracle. By 1986, by 1989, Romania becomes the country of hunger. That debt to be repaid must be repaid on the shoulders of Romanian workers who see their paychecks shrink, reducing the purchasing power of their national currency. Ultimately, they see themselves getting poorer. People start to line up to buy bread, line up to enter shabby stores where there is little to sell. Yet that little can represent salvation for entire families. What triggers the anger of the people is not so much Ceausescu's promise to return to independence, but rather the images of Ceausescu appearing on television starting from 1989, while he goes shopping in well-stocked stores, saying that, after all, Romania is not doing so badly, that in the end, it's just Western propaganda, that the worst is now behind. And there is a period of wealth, a prosperous period ahead as a prospect for Romania. Few believe it, very few, and they believe it less and less. When do the Romanians realize that Ceausescu no longer has control of the situation? He lives in a world all his own mentally, a world where Romania is a great power, where Romania is a wealthy caudal power. Romanians do not suffer from hunger. On the contrary, they can afford any luxury. This is what actually makes the Romanians very angry. And in 1989, they begin to protest. They protest strongly. They protest violently. This had never happened before, because after all, security would take action well in advance as soon as they had a hint of even an attempt to protest. Well, something happens between November and December of 1989. As often happens, many revolutions break out by pure chance, and this revolution breaks out. In Timișoara, there is a protest event against the government's decision to expel Laszlo Tokes, a very popular Hungarian-origin priest in the Transylvanian area, an area that is still populated by a small Hungarian-speaking minority. That expulsion decision is not liked by Tokes' followers, nor is it liked by the students who support the followers and surround the religious man's residence to act as a human shield for him. It was supposed to be a simple protest demonstration. Instead, everything degenerates because on December 17, 1989, the police, the army, and security forces open fire and kill several protesters. That massacre, the Timișoara massacre, becomes public knowledge. The Voice of America talks about it, as do the students from Timișoara who return home for Christmas. The word spreads, and it spreads very quickly. While Ceausescu leaves to visit Iran, that Iran which paradoxically had experienced a similar revolution after a cinema fire. Well, in this case, too, the fire is violent and flares up very quickly. Upon his return home, Ceausescu finds a square, the one in front of the Central Committee building in Bucharest, a square packed with protesters. People who no longer want anything to do with Ceausescu and his regime, people demanding justice, demanding bread, demanding an end to isolation. It's a composed crowd, but they have no intention of leaving. They're from there. It's at that moment that Ceausescu loses his head. He doesn't know how to react, or rather, he initially tries to react mildly, promising that something will change. But he's not even convinced himself, and the people notice. After all, a new wind is blowing in Eastern Europe. A young wind, wind of change, the scorpions sang. The wind of change has reached Romania as well. Enough with a cult of personality, enough with the centralized state, enough with state-owned companies, enough with control with censorship, enough with dictatorship. The young people are the propellers of a new movement, a movement that demands bread and justice for all. Ceausescu flees. He flees by helicopter, and it's the worst escape because it gives the protesters the opportunity to storm the Central Committee building. Those scenes travel globally, including throughout Romania. The power collapses, and it collapses in a resounding and sometimes even paradoxical way. The same pieces of the state, army units, and security units are informed of coup attempts and confront each other militarily in the streets, military bases, airports. Some accuse others of counter-revolution, of being at the service of the West. It's chaos, a civil war. Ceausescu no longer knows how to regain control of the state. He no longer knows how to preserve his own power. At this moment, theories are also developing about alleged plots hatched by Moscow to get rid of a rebellious dictator. an ally who had failed to keep the agreements within the Eastern Bloc. Truth or lie, we cannot know. Some scholars claim that, all things considered, it's just speculation. Other analysts, former KGB analysts, show hand in hand that indeed some of the security chiefs and some Romanian police agents were actually on the KGB payroll. But it's not enough to prove that the Romanian Revolution of December 1989 was actually orchestrated by Moscow. Rather, it is known that Ceausescu flees. He flees, first by helicopter, then by car. He takes refuge in a country far from the capital with his wife Elena. He takes refuge in Târgoviște, where he thinks he is. All things considered, I assure you, but it's not like that. It's not like that because Ceausescu relies on a small escort, almost completely unarmed. And when the villa where he is located is surrounded by protesters and even some soldiers, the guard lays down their weapons and lets the crowd take the rabbits. Ceausescu, who are not locked up in prison but in a troop transport, an armored vehicle, waiting for a trial almost farce, very quick. Here emerges another conspiracy theory. It would have been a general, Victor Anastasius Stănculescu, who plotted to overthrow Nicolae Ceausescu. Stănculescu would have done it. To cleanse his conscience from the task and the obligation of having repressed the protests in blood, and to establish himself as a new man, as a hero who frees Romania from the tyrant, from the dictator. The trial lasts a very short time. The Ceausescu couple are taken out of the troop transport, lined up against a wall in front of a firing squad composed of 3 soldiers. According to the final reports, the first to fall is Elena, who yells at the soldiers, "Go to hell, all of you," and then dies. Mowed down by the burst, Ceausescu sings the notes of the Internationale, but he also dies, mowed down by the Kalashnikov. The couple are buried in a temporary grave, then moved and then reburied in another grave. But around them, legends are already developing. The legends about Ceausescu's wealth, fueled by those images on television, of the couple who shopped in well-stocked stores with almost luxury goods and who extolled the high quality of life. In Romania, they begin to favor villas abroad and bank accounts in Switzerland. Even of a house equipped with gold faucets, no trace will ever be found. Despite starting from 1990, just a few days after the end of the revolution and the killing of Ceausescu, an investigative commission tries to probe all the accounts of the Ministry of Finance and especially the bank accounts of the Ceausescu family. In fact, it will be discovered that Ceausescu earned little, like a simple employee in the United States. He set aside money for his children, for university, for studies abroad. Only one of their children, Nicu, seemed too attracted to the demon of money. He was long talked about as a hardened gambler, capable in Las Vegas of burning through large fortunes and, in one case, even paying off gambling debts, with horses that belonged, among other things, to the Romanian state. Truth or lie? In this case, the rumors about the alleged wealth of Ceausescu, wealth of which, however, no definitive trace can be found, mix over time. But even today, what is remembered of Ceausescu is that, in addition to the ignominious end, the cult of personality, and the position sometimes in open contrast with Moscow, the story of the gold faucets, the marble bathrooms, and the luxurious villas is remembered. A counterpoint, a contrast to the living conditions much more miserable of his population. But who really was Nicolae Ceausescu? He was a son of Romania, of rural Romania, who had tried to remove Romania from its past, to ferry it into an industrial technological future, a future that, however, presupposed ties with abroad that he himself didn't want to have. That presupposed a new exchange of technologies that he never approved of. Instead, he tried to steal those technologies through industrial espionage. To grow a country, it is necessary to open up in a clear, unconditioned way. Open the borders, open trade, cultural exchange, allow broad freedom of expression, something Nicolae Ceausescu was not willing to do. For power, he would do anything. He would even destroy his own country. That country that, in the end, deceived by his promises, disillusioned, angry about what it had seen and the propaganda, had reacted in the worst way, revolting against what he wanted to be, the father of the new Romania. And Ceausescu's end is an end that many dictators share. Think about the end of Mussolini, shot and then hung upside down, along with his lover Claretta Petacci and other hierarchs at Piazzale Dolito in Milan. It's the furious reaction of those who have been deceived, flattered, disappointed, outraged, and in the end also morally and socially violated. Dictatorships, to this fault, create illusion, the illusion that everything can be solved with a snap of the fingers, trusting the man who shouts the loudest, the most determined man, the character who can do anything, as long as he is given full powers. But it's never the solution. There is no Superman capable of doing everything and creating wealth from nothing. And when it is discovered that all those promises were lies, then the people react badly, they react violently, they demand the tyrant's head. And sometimes it's the case of Mussolini, but also the case of Nicolae Ceausescu. That head is personally taken.